Welcome to the lab! In this episode, I'm going to show you how I made some graveyard tiles. I'm just going to get right into it this week. I don't have a ton of time to record, but I wanted to show you how I made some graveyard tiles. I made these tiles for two different reasons. One, well, probably three really. One, they look cool. Two, I want to do a whole graveyard set of stuff for multiple different reasons. One specifically for Age of Sigmar, but also any other fantasy role-playing game that I might want to play. I know specifically for the Soulblight Gravelords that I have that they're supposed to come into play with two different Gravesites on the field, and I thought what better way to signify that than actually splitting up two different graveyard areas. So let's get right into how I made these, and I hope you enjoy it. Alright, so the first thing that I did was measure a couple of minis to make sure that the graves would be big enough to hold the mini. And it looked like 2 inches by 1 inch was the typical humanoid-sized gravesite. Then I lined up my ruler and measured out 1 inch, and then 2 inches on the top, and drew all the lines for the grid of stuff that I needed to cut. And I just used basic chipboard as the base for this. I figured they were small enough that I wasn't worried about them warping too much, and in the end they didn't warp at all, really. I think I had trouble with one of them because some of the glue I put on it was a bit too liquidy, but whatever, it wasn't that bad. Once I put Mod Podge on it, I was able to seal up. Then I snipped some toothpicks into what I thought would be appropriate size to build a couple of crosses. I wanted to do a few variations on the grave sites of different markings. So a little super glue, some toothpicks, and my super glue accelerant. Then for the other markers I used some easy peel foam board, and I cut out little squares and rectangles that I wanted. You'll see on the left there that I got some stone plaques, and then I made these squares into little round headstones. Not round, but rounded. Then I put a couple pins through the chipboard, cut them down a whole bunch so that it was just a little bit, and then I used some tacky glue pins and on the headstone, and then just slid them in there so that they were more solidly connected just than from the glue. And for the crosses I used a little bit of modeling paste. Just built up a little mound to make it look like mud or dirt that they were poked into, and left them overnight to dry. I took some Mod Podge and I sealed them all. Front, backs, and sides. You want to make sure you get everything so that the paper layers don't separate for whatever reason at any point in time. Then I filled up bottom of a cup just a little bit with some basic PVA glue, spread it all around the base, and put on some sand. And actually after I did this step I left these to dry overnight as well. Well, actually I left them to dry for several hours, but just before I went to bed I hit them all again with a very watered down PVA glue to make sure all the sand stuck, and that made them rock solid. And here is the last blank ones that I did. I cut apart a couple of zombie hands and feet, and then I super glued them to the board. And then what was left of the PVA glue I mixed in sand and some more modeling compound so that it would be a thick gloopy substance with a bunch of sand and rocks mixed in. And I just glopped it onto the board to make it look like a mud pile, which turned out just great. This is supposed to look like a fresh grave that maybe a zombie is trying to get back out of. Somebody a little restless, or maybe not quite buried, depends on what you need it for. Just messing around with it so it didn't look too spiky or too flat. And then I took basic Vallejo primer, thinned it down a whole bunch, and put the primer over everything. So that would just be easier to paint, look more cohesive. That, and so it would stick to all the glue and the sand and the foam and everything. Just wanted to make sure that none of it was going to be chipping off anytime soon. Then I used a dark brown for the mud. I think it's espresso was the color I used. Same color that I used on the Impaled Corpses video. I used a dark gray to paint all the headstones, and then a golden brown to paint the crosses for wood. And I also dry brushed all of the stones a dark gray. Then I hit everything with a dark brown wash. Except for the headstones, I used a black wash on those. And then I dry brushed everything lightly with a vanilla. That way it looked like there was multiple layers to everything, and that they maybe were chipped or worn or everything. The one step that I forgot to do on the headstones was to do texturing, like cracks and chips out of them. I just didn't think about it at the time. I don't know why. Normally I do. And then I super glued some Gamer's grass tufts from the Marshland set to a bunch of the Gravesites. Pretty much all of them except for the ones with the hands and feet coming out of them, because those are supposed to be look like newly turned earth. I'm really enjoying how these turned out. It's gratifying to know that you can make a few bits of scatter terrain. There's only 20 here, but they're going to be spread out enough that it's actually going to give the entire area that they're in a graveyard-like feel. I think for most games, these are going to be spaced out well enough that you can actually get guys in between them, like you would normally at a graveyard. So they're actually going to cover quite a bit of area on the map, wherever I'm going to put these. I could bunch them up if need be, but it's just as easy to separate them so that you can get models to walk between them. And you can see immediately that it's going to take like a 1 foot by 2 foot area and turn that into a whole graveyard. This only took a couple of hours of work, and I think for most games involving a graveyard of some kind, these are really going to help sell the play area. If you have any other graveyard ideas that you'd like me to do, please leave them in a comment below. I'd love to look through them and see if anything inspires me. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button and ring that little notification bell so that you can see when the next video comes out. And until next time, experiment with your hobby.